Hi folks, on this Walk with a Difference we're going to visit what was during the Second World War one of the most secret locations in the UK. This is the site of RAF Tempsford, which is in Bedfordshire in England, and two of the special duty squadrons, 138 Special Duty Squadron and 161 Special Duty Squadron, were based here. They were here to facilitate the dropping of the agents, the SOE agents, Special Operations Executive agents, into the occupied countries. SOE was formed in the dark days of 1940 when the UK stood alone, but many men and women in the occupied countries wanted help, weapons, money, training to help free themselves. So the SOE was set up, and then later in the war the OSS from America joined in as well, and in Churchill's words was to set Europe ablaze. And they took off from the location of which is now farmland again. It's reverted to farmland. But we're going to walk towards one building that you can visit. We're walking along a bridle path here, and it will take us to a building which is on private land, but only a few hundred metres off the track. And I think if you're respectful, there's no main issues visiting that. And that building is called Gibraltar Farm, and it's the barn. The other farm buildings have now gone. And it was deliberately used to look like a barn to hide it from the German reconnaissance flights, etc. And this building was where many of the agents, was their last look at England, so to speak, because they went into this barn, they had their final check to make sure they weren't carrying any documentation or items that would betray them to the enemy as being British. They were given a last check there. I think they probably received their pistols there, and maybe even their L-pills. Being an SOE agent was so dangerous, so terrifying, that they were issued with lethal pills, L-pills, which was quick-acting cyanide. Some of them would sew them into their cuffs or into their somewhere on their shoulders, so they could have quick access to them, because if they were captured, they knew for sure they'd be interrogated and tortured by the Gestapo, followed by death, of course. And also the worst torture would probably come pretty quickly, because the Germans wanted to get that information before the resistance cell could disperse, once they knew perhaps an agent had been captured. So extremely brave men and women, many who, of course, lost their lives, and also extremely brave RAF pilots. They flew different types of aircraft. 138 Squadron handled most of the supply and agent drops using Halifax, and 161 Squadron using the Lysander aircraft. Now, those pilots in particular had to navigate to, say, a field somewhere in France, land, and the resistance groups on the ground would put out things like bike lamps to form a triangle. But of course, they never knew when they were landing whether it was going to be the German reception committee rather than the resistance. So incredibly brave men there, and skillful to be able to A, find the location, and then B, be able to land and take off. So their role was to insert agents into the occupied countries and then pick up agents coming back to the UK. Their aim was to have a turnaround time of like 3 minutes to get the agent in out the back and the new agent in. And all this was done with tremendous secrecy. The pilots didn't know who these agents were. They were just dropping someone in the middle of France somewhere. And we'll see the building where, as I mentioned, they had their last check before they went out from this building called the barn. They were then put in a darkened car taken to the runway to climb, say, into the Lysander and away. Also, some of the Lysander flights were for RAF Tempsford because it was closer to the continent, just to save them fuel time, etc. I've not been there yet. That will be another visit sometime in the future. This is just reverted now, like many airfields after the war, to commercial use and farming land. But as I say, I'm walking on a public bridle path, and I think as long as you keep to that, there's no real problems there. You can't go wandering off that to other parts of the airfield because, I say, it's private land. Now, in the actual barn, they're quite poignant. Lots of pictures of agents. Some of them are quite famous. We'll take a look at, and pictures of the crews, etc. And you get it's quite an atmospheric place to visit, I think. This is the end of one of the main runways, which they were digging up. Not sure why. I saw some very large pipes going in. Now, in the trees in the background, you can't see it very clearly, is this building called the barn. There was a farmhouse next to that, which is since gone, and that's when they had their briefings, etc. And as I say, the barn was then the last building they went in for their final quick check, issued parachutes, and we'll see the parachute racks in the barn. And I think we're given their pistols there. Probably their LPILs might have been earlier because they probably did want to sew them into their clothing. There's certainly one documented case of an agent using an LPIL, a woman who took that instead of being tortured, but there might be many more, of course. So many agents did lose their lives, and of course they weren't just British, there were all sorts of nationalities being dropped into these occupied countries. In the nearby village, a bit later on, we will be visiting a special memorial to these people, particularly the women that's mentioned on this memorial. So you can just see coming into view there, this building they call the barn. There were some 41 female agents working alongside their male colleagues in France in F section. And of the 41, 26 survived the war. Some 12 or so were actually executed by the Germans. And there are some famous names amongst that list. Violette Sabo is perhaps one of the most well-known. She joined SOE after her husband was killed in North Africa. And she took off from this airfield on her first mission, and she would definitely have been in the barn that we're going to visit. And then on a second mission, she took off from a different location. Unfortunately, that was her last mission. She was compromised, and after a battle with German troops using a Sten gun, she was captured. And later, she was executed by being shot in the back of the head at Ravensbrück concentration camp, alongside two other female agents, Denise Bosch and Lillian Rolfe. And that was in February 1945, and Violetta, was only 23 at the time. So some very brave and tragic stories. The bridle path we're walking on, I think, goes on, so you could probably carry on further, but we're going to turn the corner here into this area called the barn. As I mentioned, it is on private land, but I don't think there's any issues as long as you're respectful and don't start wandering around, the rest of the private property, the rest of the old airfield. So when we get inside, you'll see various pictures, various very faded pictures really of agents and air crews. I mean, the air crews as well did a fantastic job getting the agents to and from their locations like France, particularly the pilots with their navigation, but also the crews as well. The Handley Page, of course, was crewed by different crew members, not just pilots. So as we walk up here, the barn will come into view. This hedge, I think, wasn't there at the wartime. You'll see some of the photos, the old photos of the area. But there was a farmhouse here where they received their briefings and probably some of their equipment. But the barn is where they finally went into to get their parachutes and perhaps pistols, etc. So there's the outside of the barn, and as it is, that's it. It's a barn, and it was used for that purpose. And then SOE took it over. It's just clad with wood on the outside. Inside, there's been a brick structure put inside by the British MOD at some stage. And then there are various racks where the parachutes would have been kept. Some of them have actually collapsed now, concrete plinths. So this would have been, for many of them, men and women, their last view of England in a way, because from here they went by car to the runway, which is only a short distance away, and then were flown out by Lysander or Halifax. It does have a sort of poignant atmosphere in here. As we can see, the poppy reef's been left, photographs as well, which we'll take a look at. On the left there is a picture of a Lysander, on the bottom left, the small aircraft, remarkable aircraft that was used for these agent pickups and drops. And then pictures of some of the air crews as well that helped with the agents and also lost their lives. The British had a particular disaster in then Holland, because early on an agent was compromised and they were able to turn over one, and then they captured all the subsequent agents. So there's a picture of the barn and the surrounding buildings as they were. And then we've got some photographs. There's in the centre there, Violette Sabo. And then she won the George Cross posthumously. It was awarded to her 5-year-old daughter in 1947 by King George VI. And that's Lillian Rolfe. She was also executed at Rasenbrook with Violette and Denise Bosch. Another remarkable woman was Christina Skarbek. She was the first agent to be dropped into occupied countries. She had a remarkable career. She survived the war. In fact, she was the first and the last of the female agents, and she was known as Churchill's favourite. Very worth looking up her history, an incredible life story and incredible feats. And unfortunately, although she survived the war, she was murdered in London in 1952. She was stabbed to death in a hotel. And I'm just now looking at some of the RAF guys who also lost their lives helping these agents shut down, perhaps after dropping agents off. And as part of the reenactment I went to recently, they did various reenactments of women during the war, and one was featured SOE in Christina's story. So I'll be showing that as I filmed it at the time. So yeah, many poignant stories here, and obviously loved ones have visited here, and although it's just a plain brick building inside, of course it would have so many memories of the people who actually visited here. As I said, Violette would definitely have been in this barn at some stage before her first mission. Again, we've got some more photographs of how the barn used to look. Obviously not changed that much over the years. The surrounding area's changed, but not the actual barn itself. So yeah, this was one of England's most secret locations during World War II, and we'll be visiting the local village and the memorials there after visiting the barn. So there's the names of the Hudson crew that were killed. I think they were shot down by night fighters. Obviously most of the flights would have been all the flights would have been during moonlight conditions to aid with navigation and finding the drop zones or finding the landing zones for the Lysanders. So we'll be shortly looking at the reenactment, and I'll just play that as I filmed it at the time about Christina. And yeah, she was murdered by somebody. She did know, I think she'd worked with him on cruise ships. He was then executed for her murder in 1952. Handy Page, Halifax. So again, a location perhaps that's not widely known. Obviously many of the stories, although there are some famous ones like Violette, there's many agents who, remain unknown to the general public. But the service they give was unbelievable. They made a massive difference, particularly in D-Day, getting D-Day ready for D-Day, etc. And they provided different services to the resistance groups. Also, some groups, of course, were helping returning shot down RAF crews, getting back to the UK via the Pyrenees into Spain, lifeline type groups. So coming up shortly will be the reenactment section that was at the Harbour show. That's also separately on my channel, the military show at Market Harbour in Leicestershire.
She was Britain's first recruited and longest-serving female special agent. She was known to be Churchill's favourite. Just maybe a story. She worked in Eastern Europe, Egypt and the Middle East.
SOE agent, reenactment.
It was her service behind enemy lines in France in 1944 which made her legendary among the special forces. She was awarded an OBE and a George Medal. But this incredible woman was murdered in 1952 in a hotel by a man who became obsessed with her. So she went through all of that to be murdered by a man that barely knew her.
So that's reenactment of the SOE, which I'm putting in at the end of my SOE visit to RAF Tempsford. Okay, so now we're in the local village of Tempsford. Small village here, little pub you can go into if you've got time. And there is a memorial here particularly to the women SOE agents, but also the personnel that helped them, the air crews, what I missed was in the church there's actually a memorial to the 623 airmen from the two squadrons who lost their lives while supporting these agents. And there's two memorials here. There's the usual classic World War I, World War II memorial that you find in every village, every town, every city in the UK. And an extensive list of names on there, particularly from the First World War, what was called the Great War. And then there is the memorial to the SOE agents. And on this memorial, 75 known agents are named. 29 were arrested, 16 were executed, 3 died of illness and captivity, 1 committed suicide using the L pill. And this memorial was unveiled in 2013 by the then Prince Charles, or of course he's now King Charles, and very tastefully done in marble. And I think then Prince Charles inserted the last piece in the mosaic on the front of the memorial to complete it. So the names are listed there of 75 known agents. These are the women agents. I think altogether there was over 900 agents in SOE, and of course the Americans also had the OSS. And these agents came from, lots of different countries. Obviously a lot from the UK, a lot from France, but a whole list of names. Netherlands, a woman from Chile, a woman from India, USA, Russia, USSR. So not just the UK, of course, Belgium. Extensive list of people that decided that they wanted to be part of the fight against the occupation. And here's just a story about the two squadrons. 138 Squadron and 161 Squadron. And particularly on the missions to the Netherlands, which were a bit of a disaster, Holland, for the British. Because they turned over on agents, then the night fighters were able to shoot down a number of the planes. And that's just some of the pictures of the guys from the First World War that were lost in this village. Again, I didn't realise at the time and missed going inside the church. I wish I'd done that, because as I said, there's a memorial in there to the airmen who lost their lives. So I didn't actually realise that. This is all part of course, doing the research before you visit somewhere, isn't it, really? Which I obviously haven't done enough about, really. So very, very, very brave men and women who parachuted or landed in not just France but other countries as well during the Second World War. Rest in peace, all of you. You deserve to.